Dr. Jacob Liberman. I think for many of us, Dr. Liberman does not need much introduction. For many of us, early on in the 1990s, his book, Light Medicine of the Future, was a great inspiration. It really helped many of us to focus and gain energy in our research. And it contributed greatly to bringing together the community of light researchers. And I believe it is still the most read book on light and vision. And of course, Jacob since then has continued researching and evolving, and he will be presenting us where he is at now. All right, so we are ready for you, Jacob. Switch over the mic.
We're on. You know, I recently, over the last couple of years, was working on a new book that was a memoir of my life. And I was particularly intrigued by many of the things that Albert Einstein said, because I noticed that as he matured, he went from a scientist to a mystic. He became an incredible philosopher. And so we give so much credence to scientific evidence and research. And the term I just heard was adopting a point of view. But there is truth beyond opinion. And if you are extremely fortunate, you may be graced in your lifetime to have an experience which I term a direct experience. Something is so absolutely clear, and yet it's almost as if the observer disappears. A little more than 1,400 years ago, the third Zen patriarch, a man named Sengsten, wrote my favorite piece. It's called the Sin Sin Ming. And the Sin Sin Ming, the first verse is, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, the world is clear and undisguised. Make the slightest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. If you wish to see the truth, hold no opinions for or against anything. To hold what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind." Now, it sounds like just poetic words. Don't believe me, it's absolutely true. It's not true because I think it's true. I've had direct experience. I had an instance of direct experience in the midst of meditating 40 years ago as a practicing eye doctor. And my eyesight cleared instantaneously. A 300% improvement in my eyesight with no change in the optical measurements of my eyes. It has remained this way for 40 years. I'm 68 and a half. Most of you know you get to be 40 and your arms are too short. I find it fascinating. It It makes me wish to look deeper into things. So here Sengsten says that looking at things this way or this way, he says, is a disease of the mind. You know, when we emerge from our mothers, if you go to different cultures all over the world, the infant is brought to the mother, and it seems common that the mother always brings the infant to her, near her left breast. And what's been interesting is that if you're measuring the heart rhythms of the infant and the mother, they're different until they get within a certain proximity, 8 to 9 inches, and then they superimpose. The two rhythms seem to become one rhythm, oneness. And I imagine that if you had a sensitive microphone next to the mother and the infant, you might hear something like, "Ah, thank God I'm home." And from what I've seen is humans spend the rest of their life looking for this feeling. Maybe you call it love, but it's beyond our concept of love. It's a sense of inseparability. I think Freud described this as oceanic bliss, a sense of limitlessness, spaciousness, that is there when we come in. We are hardwired for this state. And then conditioning occurs, I'm sure with many other factors, and we find ourselves living life according to what we like or dislike about what we see, we hear, we smell, we taste, and we touch. And then we meditate sometimes, and if we are fortunate, the part of the brain that's collecting all of this information from the senses seems to shut down, and the part of the brain that brings us into a sense of oneness, a sense of bliss, just gets flooded. And we experience a totally different reality. I've personally had experiences that have brought me to those places just through my life's experience, not necessarily through meditation or through doing some form of technique, but my life has taught me everything I know. I was not much of a reader as a child, so I thought there was something wrong with me. But I've been a sensitive since I'm a very small child. My mother used to tell me, "Oh, you're just too sensitive." I first became aware of something within our humanity that observes when I was 11 years old. I used to sell papers on a corner in Miami, Florida. And I used to ride my bicycle home from my school to get a snack and then go to the corner to sell these papers. But one day I got out of school late and I didn't have a chance to go home, so I went directly to the corner. But the papers hadn't arrived and I was hungry. And I saw a store across the street, so I went in, I didn't have any money, and I stole a candy bar, put it in my pocket. And I started to walk out and I heard a voice inside, and the voice said, "Nobody saw you." And then instantly, there was a sense that something saw me. And I went outside, I wanted to bring the candy bar back, but I was too frightened at 11 years old, so I sat across the street under a tree. And I sat with this very interesting sense that I had just experienced something that I'd never experienced before. The voice that said nobody saw you, I was very familiar with this voice. But this other something that sees without speaking, that was something I had never experienced before, that I was aware of. That was the first time, even though I didn't know it back then, that I tapped into some other aspect of consciousness, perhaps non-local consciousness. And that's been my search throughout my life. Through my own direct experience. When I was going through my professional training, I was having great difficulties in school because reading was not something that was easy for me. And I saw a fascinating demonstration. Can I borrow that from you? And what happened was that a well-known doctor came to the university where I was studying, and he did an incredible demonstration with a journalist. He took an instrument in his hand called a retinoscope, a very common instrument used by eye care practitioners. And he started looking at the journalist's eye from about 20 inches away. And then he said to the journalist, I want you to imagine that you're playing tennis. Just imagine in your mind. And then this doctor, Dr. John Streff, started saying, you just hit it. You just hit it. You just hit it. And the journalist started laughing. He said, how do you know? You told me every time when I was ready to hit it, exactly when I was going to hit it. And then he started to predict whether the journalist was hitting with a forehand or a backhand. This was 1971. I was absolutely fascinated at what Dr. Streff was looking at. And so I spoke to him, and he explained to me what he was doing, something called dynamic retinoscopy. And every patient that I had in the clinic, every opportunity I had, I would look at their eyes, and I would ask them questions. I would have them think about things. I would see what it looked like when they were reading easy material and reading difficult material. I would see what happened to their eye when they were feeling a little sad or where they were feeling elated. You know how sometimes you look up at the sky and the sun is not so clear because there are clouds in front of it? And then there are other times that you look at the sun and it's absolutely clear. Imagine that when you feel cloudy inside, when there is too much thinking, or more appropriately called worrying, that the clouds of activity obscure the light. What's interesting, this is the same individual. This is the same eye. This was the frame that preceded this frame in the video. This happens instantaneously. The one on the right is the person efforting, the person trying, the person thinking, everything we've been conditioned to do because we think we have to solve the situation because it won't come on its own. On the left is when the mind's eye and the physical eye lines up. You can call it attention. Another word is presence. This is an effortless state. This is when the person is reading one word at a time, and that is what it looks like when the reading is happening by itself, and it's flowing. This is segmented, this is flow. This is lowered performance, this is the zone. That's what I saw after looking at thousands of eyes. This continual pattern that when things line up, when everything is lined up, there's this effortlessness that happens, and the light that is emitted from the eye is what you see sometimes when you look at a young child or a person that's happy. And you see the eyes sparkle. Maybe this is why when someone is depressed, we say, "Why so blue?" And when someone is elated, they seem to shine. Maybe this is why we call advanced states of awakening enlightenment or illumination. This is why in Hollywood they call the famous actors stars. This is why all the great saints seem to have halos. And you think, it was just some artistic thing. It isn't. We become brighter, we become lighter when we allow that which is animating this universe to animate us. And it happens whether we like it or not. But when we recognize that that which is animating the movement of the planets around the sun, that which is causing a seed to always grow towards the sun, that which causes the whales to go from Alaska to Hawaii every year, a 10,000-mile journey, regardless of weather conditions, environmental conditions, their journey never vacillates more than 1 degree. There's a lake in the Philippines on the island of Palau. Every morning, thousands of jellyfish are awakened by the light of the sun, and they seem to just be moved effortlessly towards the sun. And then as the sun moves across the sky, at the end of the day, the jellyfish follow the sun and fall asleep until the next day. What's guiding those jellyfish? What's animating the orbit of all of these planets within something we call the solar system, which means of or derived from light? Is it possible that whatever is animating all of nature is also animating us? After all, we don't breathe on our own. Our hearts seem to function all by themselves. And if you look at your life carefully, even though you think you're deciding all the time, it seems like when you're thinking about it, it gets to the tip of your tongue, we say in the States. But the moment you stop, all of a sudden it comes. The memory comes by itself. I spent years working with children that were diagnosed as having learning disabilities, minimal brain dysfunctions, all kinds of reasons why they couldn't excel in school. And I realized they had the same pattern I had. They tried really hard. But I realized that the trying was actually obstructing the process. That what we call thinking is confusing because we think it's a very intellectual process. something that makes us more evolved than the rest of the animals. But when you look at this process, you'll see that most of the time it comes up when you're nervous, when you don't know what's going to happen, when life changes, which is constant, when things are not going our way. Perhaps we should consider whether much of what's happening within the mind is creative thought, or is it just worry? Is it the internal rehearsal that all of us have been conditioned to continually do to the tune of 60 to 90,000 times a day in hopes that life will turn out my way? What happens if, for an instance, you decide that even though there's a little shakiness going on, you're going to get up in front of a couple of hundred people at Sigmund Freud University without having looked at anything? And you're going to see in real time what happens if I don't do that. Now, it's been years and years and years and years of doing this experiment with me personally. I did this with young children for years to support them in uncovering what happens when you do a real-time experiment. Not to believe what you've read or what you've been conditioned to do, but to see, does that actually work? Does that process that we go through all that time, all that worrying, does that actually yield the result that we were all led to believe that it does? And if it doesn't, perhaps it's an opportunity to do a real-time experiment. My work with vision wasn't guided because I read the works of Dr. William Bates or because I studied vision training. It was guided by my own direct experience. And what I discovered is that which is seeing has no eyes. You can't localize it in time or in space. It's not a physical phenomenon. So if you're trying to exercise your eyes, you can make some improvements, but it's like going to the gymnasium. When you stop going, the muscles get flaccid again. The real neuroplastic changes, from my experience, don't occur primarily from repetition. They occur from an epiphany. You have an experience, a direct experience that is so powerful that it literally shifts everything instantaneously. Yesterday during the workshop, I shared just a few of the experiences that I've had. In 1971, after I saw Dr. Streff's demonstration and started seeing this phenomenon, I was told to go to the clinic to have a vision examination because all the senior students had to do at least 150 examinations before graduation. So I had been wearing glasses already for years, and the doctor said to me, the young doctor, you need a stronger prescription. I'd heard that every year that I went to the eye doctor. So that wasn't anything new, but he said to me, you know, your eyes are not working together very well, and this is probably the reason you've been having difficulty reading. And he gave me a device to do some exercise. He says, you exercise your eyes, it'll get better possibly. I put it in the corner of the room. I never touched it. A couple months later, I fell asleep while studying. This is what happened to me every day when I tried to study. When my eyes opened up, the first thing that caught my eye was that device he gave me, that instrument. I picked it up, and I did one little procedure. And the procedure requires that the mind's eye and the physical eye line up. They're both at the same place at the same time. Now, that isn't what I was taught, but that's what I realized after I did it. And this happened very quickly, and a light went off inside. You could say, I saw the light. After that experience, I started crying. I thought I was stupid. I was put back in school. I had a lot of problems. I was sure there was something wrong with me. I did this little thing every day for about 5 minutes. Not an exercise. All I did was look at this until a certain sensation occurred. There was a quieting that happened. There was a spaciousness that happened. I didn't realize at the time that that was what I was experiencing. And so I spent a couple of minutes every day doing this, and 2 months later, I was at the top of my class. And for the next 2 years, I made the dean's list every single quarter. And it happened just like that. And that's why I worked with these kids in school, because I realized that what was going on had nothing to do with what I was told was going on. And when I was able to allow someone to experience directly the effect of all of their worrying, and that every time we think, we hold our breath. And every time we hold our breath, it makes it impossible for it to come. You know, if you tune into your body right now, you'll notice that everything inside is doing this. And if I ask you, what is that? You'll say, oh, that's the respiratory cycle. But you know that's happening in the heart, in the vascular system, every organ, every gland, every cell, every cellular component. Everything within your system is continually doing this. And if you look outside of yourself, this is occurring everywhere. I call it the frequency of wellness. The heartbeat of the universe. It's entrained into everything. What I noticed is every time we do this very advanced thing, this worrying that we're all conditioned to do, this fundamental rhythm stops in its tracks. What we're trying to remember doesn't get any further than the tip of the tongue. We get not only tongue-tied, but brain-tied. Learning is diminished very dramatically. When we uncover this fact, not as an idea, but when you actually go through an experience where you directly experience yourself getting locked up. How many of you were at the workshop yesterday? So the translator was sitting next to me, doing a beautiful job of translation. The audience was also doing a beautiful job of accurately looking at her translation. And she felt it. And it was causing her breathing to restrict. I could feel her. I could feel whatever was happening in there. And the more she tried, the more intense it became. All of us do this almost all day long. You remember, I don't know if they have this expression in Austria, but in America, As a child, the teacher would say, oh, they know it by heart. And I assumed that meant that they memorized it. But knowing it by heart is something totally different. Knowing it by heart is what happens when the mother and the infant bond. Knowing it by heart is what happens when we connect with someone that we feel a resonance with, and all of a sudden, they have an impact upon us and we have an impact upon them, and something just relaxes. But we don't need another person for this to happen. We are hardwired for this state. But we need to uncover truth beyond opinion. And so I worked with thousands of children that had been diagnosed with all kinds of learning problems. And what I discovered is most of them were geniuses. And I developed some very interesting techniques that very gradually took them into a place where they had to mentally do something that was going in one direction and physically do something that was going in the other direction at the same time. Like looking at arrows that are pointing in one direction, and you're calling out the direction of the arrow, but moving your hands in the opposite direction. So as soon as you're asked to do that, something inside, if I was in America, says, oh shit. You get, and then it begins. And so I would gradually bring a child from a place where they felt very comfortable, very gradually bringing them to a place that would cause them to just touch upon this place where we all come to when we're in a new situation and something says, oh my God, I got to get the right answer. And I would ask them what they noticed. And I would continue to ask them to describe everything to me they noticed, until they got to the place that they started noticing that they weren't breathing, that they were all upset and they were tight. And so I would gently remind them about the breath, and I discovered something fascinating. When they were thinking, they would continually make errors over and over again. They would get continually more frustrated. When they were breathing, the answer came by itself. I'm talking about a level of magic that you can't imagine, because part of the process was that when they got into this state, it was like watching Tai Chi. These children were moving slowly, and the answer was coming out of them without any thought. At one point, I said to a young man, I said, each time I would say, would you like to try the next level? And you know, when kids get excited about something, they say, yeah, I want to do it again. So I would say, okay, turn around. And then I would have them do it without looking at it, and they would get every single answer correct when you had 20 or 25 different things, even without looking at it. There's something that sees when the eyes are closed. We experience it in our dream state. But there's information coming to us all day long. What's animating this universe is animating us. What's catching your eye is looking for you. The eye is not looking for something. There is something looking for the eye, guiding it towards the next step of your journey. I know this may sound poetic, but it's not. I'm talking about something that I absolutely know, but don't believe me. I hope you will use this as an opportunity to do an experiment with yourself, to know what is really true, because the Bible says the truth shall set you free. It absolutely does. That is the key to the freedom. It isn't that the mind is not going to do all kinds of things. It is, except you're no longer identified with all the activity. You no longer see them as my thoughts, my ideas. You begin to recognize that the only reason that you are aware of the activity in the mind is because your true essence is observing it. And it is not it is observing it. It's a very important discovery because we are so identified with this activity that we think that that's where everything is happening from. What physicists call local consciousness. But my sense is it's happening from non-local consciousness. The intelligence that is animating everything in this universe in a congruent and coherent manner is animating us as well. We think that we can just change our mind and change everything. That's like a banana tree meditating all day long, having a guru, living in an ashram, becoming a vegan, doing all the right things in hopes of becoming an apple tree. Now, you laugh about it, but human beings think that they're fruit salad trees. Each of us has a purpose for being. Marcus Aurelius said this 2,000 years ago. There is an ordering force in this universe, and there's a guiding element within us. The great Indian sage Ramana Maharshi said, we all come into this life with a purpose. As I said yesterday, what is the purpose? That which you know by heart. That which comes to you without thinking, without worrying, without even practicing. It's just natural for you. And this is inseparably connected with our health. Not just our mental health, but our physical health as well. Because the timing and exactness of this universe is also available within each of our bodies. They're miraculous in the way that they function. So when the light, which is the intelligence of life, as I mentioned yesterday, relativity theory pretty much demonstrated that for light, there is no time, there is no space. Quantum theory demonstrates that for light, there is no charge, there is no mass, there is no weight. It's non-material, it's formless. It's more fundamental than time, space, or matter. Now, we just experience this material world and we assume that is what's going on. So we make choices and decisions and worry all day about the material world. But the eye is designed to detect and respond to as few as 3 photons of light. In other words, we are designed to detect and respond to life in a formless state before it is rendered into form. Hindsight is 20/20. It's not accurate. Foresight is 20/20. And what I'm sharing is that I began to notice that for most of us, we experience something, and then sometime later we experience the same thing again, and sometime later we experience the same thing again. And if we're very fortunate, at some point, we have an awareness about these repeated experiences, an aha. And what I began to notice is that After that initial awareness, the lag time, the time between the experience and the awareness that follows narrows. And at some point, they seem to occur simultaneously. The best-selling author in America, Ram Dass, titled the book, Be Here Now. And so you think, I've arrived. And then as soon as you say that, you're back in the mind again. What I found is that when this experience of simultaneous awareness and experience occurs simultaneously, all of a sudden, every so often, you have this very unusual thing that happens. Awareness precedes experience. You have a flash. It doesn't come from you. It comes to you from where I do not know. You get a flash, and you don't even realize until sometime later when it actually occurs in your life and you say, I saw that yesterday. Now, this is not unusual. Most of your parents, sometimes you just get a feeling about your son or your daughter. You pick up the telephone. Oh, Daddy, I was just thinking about you. I've had profound experiences well beyond this nature. And the experiences are so profound that they shift everything. They shift everything. You go from a place of an idea to knowing, but there isn't a knowing because I know something. There's a knowing that is coupled with humility because you realize, oh my gosh. And you're just silenced. It just absolutely silences you. In 1976, I was in this state of meditation. My eyes were closed. I was just breathing. And all of a sudden, I was aware of myself in the room meditating. In fact, I was aware of the entire room. And everything was clear. Not only optically clear, there was a level of quiescence that was beyond description. It was as if everything was known, but there was no knower. Jacob wasn't there. And the perception was holographic. It wasn't like I'm looking at you and you're looking at me. It was as if it was a field of eyes. And when I came out of this experience, my eyesight was clear. I went to my office. I checked my eyesight on multiple charts. I was a researcher for American Optical Corporation at the time. I had their newest projectors with all the different eye charts, and I kept over and over again, 300% better on charts I'd never seen. Checked my eyes. The optical measurements are exactly the same. The only thing that I could imagine is that something is seeing beyond the eye. What was interesting is I spent years after that during a period that I called an experiment on the workings of the mind. I wanted to see if I could access this place because it was so powerful, its impact, that I wanted to be able to share this with others. And I figured, the way I used to describe it, I said, I know there's a master key. I don't know if you have that term here, but in America, the people that take care of the big office building, they have one key that opens up all the doors. So I had this sense, maybe there's a key that if I could just press that button, everything would open up. And I would experiment looking as if I was from behind my head. I imagined that something, that whatever was seeing was behind me and slightly above me. And when I was able to come to that place, two things happened that were rather profound. The vision opened up like a wide-angle telescopic lens in all dimensions. And there was no sense of pain sensation in the body. So I began to experiment if I had physical pain or a headache, what would happen if I allowed my awareness to drift to this place? And as soon as I was there, the pain would instantly go away. It was as if my connection with the physical body just separated. Now, it's difficult to stay in that place initially, so the pain kept coming and going and coming and going, but I noticed that if I could just remain in that place for a very short period of time, like less than a minute, when I came back into the body, the pain was gone. And I remember thinking back then, I wonder if this might be applicable to other conditions of the body. And I mentioned yesterday that since that time, I'm able to access this place without doing anything. And since that time, I have never had Novocaine when I've gone to the dentist. Root canals, crowns, a lot of them, no pain. Not because it's totally relaxed. I'm sharing these things with you because maybe something in you will say, let me try that. Let me just see what happens with that. So that happened my eyesight shifted in 1976, and I spent the next few years looking at things, and then life presented me my next opportunity. It was November 30th of 1977. We were going to go to a party to my mother-in-law and father-in-law, my Schwieger Mutti and Schwieger Papa's house for a pre-New Year's Eve party, and my wife went out shopping and didn't come home. And that was the beginning of the end of a relationship. And I had what at that time would be called a nervous breakdown. I had 30 to 40 panic attacks a day, continually. It went on for years. 6.5 years I spent in this state. It was a very difficult time. This was 1978. Wasn't a lot of people to talk to about these things. I had to find myself through the midst of this hell. And after about a year of this, I found a therapist that I liked. So I went to the therapist, and the first session the therapist said to me, "So what did you learn about your life from this experience?" And the first thing that came out of my mouth is, "I married my father dressed as a woman." Because I realized that the dynamics that occurred in my relationship with my wife, the same things that upset me were the same things that upset me as a child with my father. This is fascinating. So I started looking at every intimate relationship that I had had up to that point, and I noticed the exact same pattern in every intimate relationship that I had. I didn't have a lot of relationships, but the 3 or 4 that I had, it was absolutely there, the same exact pattern. So I said, wow, this is interesting that I have this with women. But then I discovered the same dynamic was true with my closest male friends. And it was true with my employer. So then I started looking at my teachers. I wrote the names of all of my teachers, going back to elementary school, the ones I could remember. And with the exception of one teacher in 5th grade, I noticed the same power struggles. Now that was a fascinating discovery for me, because I realized there was nowhere to hide. Life was going to find me. Wherever I went, life kept presenting me with a situation that replicated something that was not quite resolved within me, and it kept creating agitation, and the agitation brought a bigger level of awareness. Now, when most people experience agitation, they say, I don't want any of that. Let's change the subject on the remote control of life. But if you look at all biological systems, aggravation, agitation, perturbance is absolutely the key that starts the process of expansion. Even when you put the clothes in the washing machine, it's not the soap and the water, it's the agitation that makes it all come out in the wash. I began to see, I got very interested in the science of life. And then I began to realize, wow, it seems like life keeps presenting me with a human homeopathic remedy. Something that is just like something that I've never been able to embrace, and it continues to present that over and over again in different doses until on some level you're desensitized from that. And so that got me started on using color, not from the point of view of a recipe, this for this, and this for this, and this for this, but I started looking at how people responded to colors. And first I would ask them. And then I started taking physiological monitoring equipment and monitoring their physiology as they looked at different colors. And it was very, very interesting, totally different for every person. People seemed to be receptive to some colors and allergic to others. And when I say allergic, they had psycho-emotional and physiological reactions. Sometimes they would break out in hives. The ones that had asthma, they'd get to a certain color, and all of a sudden the asthma would be activated. Change the color, and it would calm down. And I started realizing maybe light and life are the exact same thing in two states of existence. One is formless, and one is form. Years and years of working with color in this way, and I found empirically that what we perceive as color is a vibrational representation of a certain aspect of our life, a certain portion of the life spectrum. So an aspect of the light spectrum seems to be related to an aspect of the life spectrum. Yesterday, when I took many of you through a visualization, you experienced all kinds of memories and things coming to the surface, some very, very deep, just from visualizing a color. And then we demonstrated that there's a relationship between that and where different conditions seem to exist in the body. So my approach to utilizing color wasn't based on someone else's theory or a good idea. I was the first patient with it. And I started noticing that when I looked at indigo, I started having flashbacks and panic attacks. So years and years of utilizing color in this way allowed me to see something about our relationship to what we call color, and that it slips beneath conscious awareness. And this is why it's so important to work very, very, very gently. because the conscious mind cannot stop it. It goes very, very deep into our system, and it touches things that are frequently outside of our awareness. Psychotherapy is very, very, very powerful. Psychotherapy with color is of a whole different nature. You need both. Why? The science is only good in the hands of a masterful individual that knows how to be a sweet human being, that can be with someone without pushing, without pulling, and create a space so that that person can open. So a beautiful blend of science and art can allow us to help a great number of people. I want to stake to your schedules, so I would like to, I've shared many different things because I never know what's going to come. But if you have questions or comments, I would like to leave some time for us to interact rather than just provide you with that. Anyone?
You can pass the microphone.
You probably expected science, and I gave you my life.
Question, anybody?
I just want to say just one thing. We say the most important things are health and happiness. But there's no health without happiness. And happiness cannot be dependent on whether you do something that I want you to do or whether you don't. The real state is not related to that. And that's where the freedom exists. So I wanted to share with you something about my life's journey of approaching that place, because whether you're a lay individual or you're working with people, we're all looking at the end of the day for the same thing. We would like our life to be happy. Yes?
Hello. I have a question. You were talking about the indigo and that it caused you panic attacks. How did you proceed? Were you working with colors you loved, or did you manage to look at the color for some time every day? Or
Yeah. At first, when I first came across this and I was experimenting. So, when you're very excited, you just want to jump right into it. And so I started using this with different people as well as myself. And I found out that, sometimes I would use it and the person would not come back. And I would run into them in town a year later and I'd say, "What happened?" And they said, "That one session stirred me up for 6 months." Whoa. So what happened is the first time, and this happened with John Downing, who is also a person that's done a lot of work in this area. He had me look at indigo light while it was flashing, and within a microsecond, my heart was about to burst out of my chest. It was in a totally darkened room. I was totally disoriented. I crawled on the floor out of this room. And then I realized, wow, this is a very powerful tool. So I took the colors that were adjacent to that very sensitive place, and I gradually, adjacent, next to. So if indigo was a difficult one, maybe I would go with turquoise. And I would lower the illumination level, very soft, and I would bring it to the place that felt good, and I would just stay there until I first began to notice the agitation, and then I would back it off. What I discovered is that matters of the heart, you must be very, very gentle with. It must be done by invitation. So what I kept noticing is less is much more. And you cannot even imagine the power of nothing. Sometimes just, I said yesterday that when I used to do a lot of events for doctors, I would say to them, don't work with anyone you don't love. And the reason is that maybe the most important aspect of getting well is the connection. The connection. You don't get the second chance for the first impression. So it takes time for that individual to feel in a safe place with you. You don't want to do anything that's going to make them feel as though you pushed them over the edge. And so I began to work very gently with myself until I got to the place that I could increase the amount of time with that very, very agitating color. And it brought me back to an event when I was 3 years old that had something to do with my father, which was the first time that I experienced what I felt was criticism from him. Thank God my parents lived into their 90s. And now I realize my mother and father were the greatest teachers I've ever had. But at that time, I was looking at all of these different things in my life, and the process took me to a place where I find that I'm now successful at life. Not just being a doctor or being an author. All those things are great. But there's nothing better than having an inseparable relationship with your son and daughter. There's nothing better than feeling an authentic love for people. Not because they're this kind of person, but just for people. And as I became accepting of myself as I was, not needing to be different, not feeling like I was a problem that needed to be solved, that sense has a contagious quality. I share this with you because most of you are healthcare providers on some level. And it's a critical piece to spend the time to experiment with yourself, to see what is true for you. That softens us and allows us to work with another human being in a way that is mutually beneficial. Yes?
Ich glaube, mein Englisch reicht nicht aus, alles zu sagen, was ich gerne sagen wollte, fragen möchte.
Someone will translate.
Okay. So, ich bin eine ganzheitliche Farbberaterin und Heilpraktikerin für Psychotherapie. Ich bin dabei, diese beiden Berufe jetzt zu verbinden.
Thank you.
Und mache oft die Erfahrung, dass Farbwahrnehmung auf ganz verschiedenen Ebenen passiert. Also auch auf der psychischen, aber auch auf der körperlichen Ebene. Und ich wollte fragen, berücksichtigen Sie die Körperfarben der Menschen auch bei Ihrer Beurteilung, welche Farbe für jemanden nötig ist? Weil ich habe die Erfahrung gemacht, dass Menschen eine Aversion gegen Farben haben, sehr oft, die sie selbst nicht reflektieren, also die ihr Körper nicht reflektiert. Zum Beispiel ein sogenannter kühler Farbtyp, der keine warmen Farben reflektiert. Das ergibt sich oft, dass so jemand warme Farben nicht mag. Aber das hat dann nichts mit der psychischen Ebene zu tun, glaube ich.
She's a holistic color consultant and
Heilpraktiker, I understand.
Heilpraktiker for psychotherapy. And her question is, do you take into consideration the bodily colors the colors of harmony that suit somebody. So she brought the example, for example, if a person is very in harmony with cool colors, she might not like at all warm colors. And the question is if you take this into consideration.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I take it into consideration. We're each different. We're each designed differently. And that's a fact, not a problem. So, bananas are usually yellow. We probably are not going to make, well, some of them are red, but you may not see ones in purple, for instance. What's important is you provide everything and you allow the person to discover every aspect of themselves. So the way that I enjoy using color is not to fix anything or to treat anything. I allow the person to look at it and notice what happens. And then I allow the awareness to be curative. Because when we see something, it begins to change instantaneously. I mean, it really happens instantaneously. It starts to change. So I take it all into account, and frequently I will begin where they feel comfortable and gently move them into the area that might be a little difficult for them, never to create difficulty, but for them to gradually become comfortable with the aspects of life that used to be uncomfortable. I'll get you next. Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Mandy and I study art and science, so I'm quite happy that you mentioned the two. My question is, what sort of experience do you have with white light, which would contain all the colors?
My experience with white light. So let's talk about that. In 1975, I met a pioneer in the field of phototherapy, a man named John Ott, and we became pretty close friends for many, many years. I slept at his home many times over the years. And he was demonstrating that a plant, an animal, and a human being need the full spectrum of sunlight. And so what most people took away from his work is that if you just give full spectrum light, everything will be fine. And so I said to myself, well, if that's true, then every farmer in the country that works in the outside every day should be enlightened. But it wasn't that way. And so what I was looking at, see, Ott said these artificial light sources, they're lacking something, or they have too much of something. And when you introduce that to a living organism, you create problems of one type or another. So what immediately came to me about that is, well, if you put a piece of glass over a plant and you filter the light differently, you keep creating a different impact on the plant. Or the same thing is true with an animal. But we don't typically put a piece of glass over a human being. So I started looking at, is it possible that a human being is filtering out part of the life experience through their ideas, beliefs, intentions, emotions, and so on? And I remember watching him speak is what stirred up some of the interests and some of the discoveries that I mentioned. But I remember in the late 80s, I was doing a keynote address at an international conference, a psychology conference, as a matter of fact. And there was a woman in the audience. You may have never heard of her. Her name is Candace Pert. Candace Pert is one of she passed away the last couple years, but she wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion. And she was a neuroscientist, one of the premier neuroscientists in the field of psychoneuroimmunology, mind-body interactions, and so on. And so she was very intrigued with the work I was doing because it was affecting centers within the hypothalamus, and she wanted to know, could you activate a certain neurotransmitter, which she called VIP, with color? Because she said, you know, every state of mind creates a state of body. And I said, this is true. I said, what happens if the person is seeing with no point of view? The point I'm making is that there's a place that is available to us, and it is, we have wiring for it at birth, that allows us to experience a state of oneness. And it doesn't mean that we're sitting in meditation. It can happen with the eyes open, and it can happen throughout the day. When people, most of the everyday life, a part of the superior parietal lobe, what they call the association orientation area, is picking up information from all of the senses and flooding our system with it. And this is what we're responding or reacting to all day long. You go into meditation, and all of a sudden the activity in that part of the brain reduces significantly, and another area called the attention association area in the prefrontal lobe becomes very active. And if you've meditated for a while, when you get to that place, there are brain changes associated with bliss, with higher states of consciousness, with feelings of religious type experiences. And this happens with not only meditators, but individuals who are praying and so on. But our life is designed to be a prayer. Not just the moments we pray or meditate. Our life is a moving meditation. And there is a possibility to begin to experience something else that is, I don't even know how to speak about it, but it is so different than our typical everyday experience that after a while, the everyday experience is there in the background, but it's not the main thing. It's not the main thing. And so when I was meditating, which I started doing around 1970, it was a wonderful practice which I would do for 20 minutes twice a day. And I had wonderful impact from it. But then after I stopped meditating, I was back in the real world. And my life was just going up and down. And so I took my 20-minute meditation and I made it into 21-minute meditations. And when I got to the place that the moment I closed my eyes, I was there, then it became 30-second meditations. You know, every time I used the toilet, I stopped standing up like most men. I sat down, and that was my meditation. So that was 8 times meditating a day at least, unless I'd had too much coffee. The point I'm making is that you can go into these states for very short periods of time, and after a while, just closing the eyes, you just get a sense and you drop into something and the world disappears. And after a while, these little periods of something that you began doing consciously begin to happen on their own. So something I want to leave you with, notice what's catching your eye. Notice what enters your awareness because it's looking for you. It's not an accident. When something enters your awareness, the eyes reflexively turn towards it. And when that contact is made, presence occurs. And with the real presence, the person just disappears. Something else just occurs, and it just guides you to the next place that you need to be, whether it is to share something or whatever. And if you were in the workshop yesterday, you saw me doing different things that I was just guided to do, whether, I saw someone's hand, I don't know why I was supposed to take their hand. I don't know what you're supposed to hear this morning. For me to say, I know what everyone needs to hear today, so I plan my talk exactly, but I don't know that until I come here, until I am with you, and then I wait, and then something starts to happen. There's a possibility of living life without a net. And it's incredibly exciting. And it takes us to our maximum potential. And it's not some state where, I'm enlightened. No, you're just delighted. You're just delighted because you're having this experience. At 6:30 this morning, I went to have my coffee because I figured, I'll have it early so there's no one there. I can just have a few minutes of quiet. And my dear friend Sarah sat next to me, and we started talking about love, and the tears came. And this happens all the time. I get touched. We limit our love to special people. But we can actually fall in love with life. It's our natural state. It's a desireless desire. It's the inseparability that we share at a real fundamental level. There was a gentleman in the back, yes, that can we bring him the microphone? And then I'm 20 minutes over, but that's because we started a half an hour late. This will be the last question. I promise I would be on time, and sorry.
The question is there any, or could you help us understand the overlaps, if any, between your color therapy and the chakra balancing systems in Ayurveda or the Dantian balancing systems in Chinese medicine?
All I can share with you is what I have found empirically. I notice that the colors that someone is uncomfortable with, there's a very, very high degree of correlation between where they develop issues in their body, whether they be surgeries, injuries, infections, traumas, or where they hold stress. So there is a correlation. But I use that primarily for the individual to gain a greater awareness of their own life and their own being, for me to gain some insight, and then to see after we utilize color, and as they notice subjective changes, are there also associated physiological changes over time? Because those are the very, very last things to occur. And what I realize is you can have profound changes in the quality of your life without any changes to the physical body. I think that's the end. Thank you very, very much.